They called her the ugly sister. They wrapped her in shadows and silence, convinced the world would be better if she simply disappeared. But the moon has a way of finding those who belong to her, and on this night, destiny would no longer be denied. The grand ballroom of Wolf's Reach Palace blazed with 1,000 golden flames. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls of light, casting their radiance upon silk gowns, polished armor, and faces painted with ambition. The scent of winter roses and burning cedar filled the air, mingling with the subtle perfume of power that clung to every corner of the ancient hall. This was the night the Alpha King would choose. Every noble family in the realm had brought their daughters, their hopes wrapped in velvet and lace, their futures balanced on the edge of a single glance from the man who ruled them all. Merrick Wolfsreach stood at the far end of the ballroom, his presence commanding the space like a storm waiting to break. He was tall, impossibly so, his muscular frame draped in black leather and silver chains that caught the candlelight. His long black hair fell past his shoulders like a river of midnight, and his beard framed a jaw carved from granite and determination. He was beautiful in the way mountains are beautiful, terrifying, immovable, and touched by something older than time. His dark eyes swept across the room with barely concealed boredom. He had seen 100 faces tonight, heard 100 rehearsed laughs and calculated compliments. They all wanted the crown. They all wanted the power. Not one of them had made his wolf stir. Until now. In the corner of the ballroom, near the shadows where the candlelight barely reached, stood a figure that did not belong. She was draped in a gown of deep midnight blue, simple compared to the elaborate confections worn by the other women. A thick veil of silver-threaded fabric covered her face entirely, obscuring her features from the world. She stood alone, her posture straight, but somehow folded inward, as if she had spent a lifetime trying to take up less space. Merrick's breath caught in his chest. His wolf, silent all evening, suddenly surged forward with a force that nearly brought him to his knees. The beast within him, the primal creature that had helped him conquer kingdoms and crush rebellions, was suddenly awake, alert, and utterly focused on the veiled woman who had not once looked in his direction. Something ancient stirred in his blood. Something that whispered of moonlight and prophecy, and a bond forged before the world was young. He began to move toward her, before his mind could catch up with his body. The crowd parted for him instinctively, conversations dying mid-sentence as the Alpha King strode through their midst with purpose they had never witnessed. Heads turned. Whispers erupted. Every eye in the room followed his trajectory, trying to understand what had captured his legendary attention. Meloria Sunfall saw him first. The matriarch of House Sunfall had spent 20 years perfecting the art of social maneuvering, and she recognized danger when she saw it. Her blood ran cold as she watched the Alpha King approach not her beautiful Ophelia, who stood radiant in rose-gold silk nearby, but the shadowed corner where her secret shame waited in silence. No, not her. Anyone but her. Meloria moved with the speed of desperation, her silk skirts rustling as she intercepted the king's path. She dropped into a curtsy so deep it bordered on theatrical, her smile frozen in place. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice honeyed with practiced warmth. "What an honor. May I present my daughter Ophelia? She has been so eager to make your acquaintance." She gestured toward Ophelia, who stepped forward with the grace of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Golden hair cascading in perfect waves, emerald eyes sparkling with calculated innocence, lips curved in a smile that promised everything and nothing. But Merrick did not look at Ophelia. His gaze remained fixed on the veiled figure behind them, and something in his expression made Meloria's heart seize with terror. "I would speak with her," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. He nodded toward the woman in the corner. The one in the veil. Meloria's composure cracked, just for an instant. "Your Majesty, that is merely my elder daughter's companion. She is of no consequence. A simple..." I did not ask for your assessment of her consequence, Merrick interrupted, and his tone carried the weight of a man who had never been denied. I asked to speak with her. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please consider clicking the link in the pinned comment to check out our Patreon and become a member. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive content you won't find here on YouTube, extended stories, special scenes, early access to new episodes, and complete romance arcs created just for our supporters. As a bonus, you'll also unlock exclusive vampire romance stories, diving into darker, more intense love stories filled with desire, danger, and passion. By joining, you're directly supporting the channel and helping us bring even more immersive stories to life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. Ophelia stepped forward then, her beautiful face twisted with something ugly beneath the surface. Your Majesty, surely you do not wish to waste your time with the ugly sister. She laughed, a tinkling sound meant to be charming but edged with cruelty. Isira is not fit for polite company. Her face is marked, you see, quite disfigured. Mother keeps her veiled to spare others the discomfort of looking upon her. The words hung in the air like poison. Merrick's eyes darkened to something dangerous. His wolf snarled within him, and for a moment, the beast nearly slipped its leash. How dare they speak of her this way? How dare they hide her like something shameful? He did not understand the fury that consumed him. He did not understand the protective rage that burned through his veins. He only knew that every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to reach the veiled woman, to see her face, to understand why his very soul seemed to recognize her. Step aside, he said quietly, and there was no mistaking the command in his voice. Meloria and Ophelia had no choice but to obey. Merrick crossed the remaining distance in 3 long strides, and then he was standing before her, the woman in midnight blue, the hidden sister, the one they called ugly and kept locked away from the world. Up close, he could see her hands trembling slightly where they clasped before her. He could see the gentle rise and fall of her breath beneath the simple fabric of her gown. She had not moved, had not fled, had not done any of the things he might have expected from someone confronted by an Alpha King's intensity. She simply stood there, wrapped in her veil and her dignity, waiting. "Look at me," he said softly. And his voice was different now. Not the commanding growl of a king, but something gentler, something almost reverent. Slowly the veiled head lifted. He could not see her face through the silver threads, but he could see the shape of her, the elegant line of her neck, the proud set of her shoulders, the quiet strength that radiated from her like moonlight through clouds. "What is your name?" he asked. And then she spoke. Her voice was low and melodic, carrying the weight of years spent in silence and solitude, carrying the depth of a soul that had learned to find peace in loneliness. It was not the simpering tone of courtiers or the calculated sweetness of social climbers. It was real. It was true. It was the most beautiful sound Merrick had ever heard. "Isira," she said. "Isira Sunfall." The name settled into his bones like coming home. His wolf howled within him, a sound of recognition and triumph and desperate longing. "Mate," the beast whispered. "Mate. Mine. Finally." Merrick's hand rose of its own accord, reaching toward the edge of her veil. He wanted to see her. He needed to see her. Every fiber of his being demanded it. But then he stopped. He saw the way she flinched just slightly. He saw the way her shoulders tensed, bracing for the rejection and disgust she had clearly experienced before. He saw the fear hidden beneath her composure. Not fear of him, but fear of what he might think when he saw what lay beneath the veil. And in that moment, Merrick Wolfsreach, the most feared Alpha King in living memory, the man who had crushed armies and broken nations, made a choice that would change everything. He lowered his hand. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I should not presume." He stepped back, giving her space, treating her with a respect she had clearly never received. "I would be honored if you would grant me a dance, Lady Isira, if you are willing." Behind them, Meloria made a strangled sound of horror. Ophelia's face contorted with jealous rage. The entire ballroom had fallen silent, every noble and courtier straining to understand what was happening. The Alpha King had bypassed every eligible beauty in the room to request a dance with the veiled woman they called ugly. Isira's hands tightened on the fabric of her gown. For 32 years, she had been invisible. For 32 years, she had been told she was shameful, that her face was a curse, that the marks she bore were signs of ill fortune that must be hidden from the world. She had learned to walk quietly, to speak softly, to take up no more space than absolutely necessary. And now, the most powerful man in the realm was offering her his hand. She could feel her mother's fury burning into her back. She could sense Ophelia's hatred like a physical force. Every voice in her head that had ever told her she was worthless screamed at her to refuse, to disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. But somewhere beneath all that pain, beneath all those years of learned invisibility, a tiny flame of defiance still burned. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, large, warm, impossibly gentle, and he led her onto the dance floor as if she were the most precious thing he had ever touched. The musicians, startled, began to play a slow waltz. The crowd parted before them like water before a ship's prow. And for the first time in her life, Isira Sunfall danced. To understand the woman who moved so carefully in the Alpha King's arms, one must first understand the child she had been. Isira was born on a night when the moon hung full and silver over the Sunfall estate, casting its pale light through the windows of the birthing chamber. She emerged into the world with a cry that echoed through the stone halls, her tiny fists clenched in protest against the cold air. Her mother, Meloria, had wept with joy, until she saw the marks. They traced across Isira's face like delicate brushstrokes of silver, starting at her left temple and sweeping down across her cheek to the corner of her mouth. Another pattern curved along her jaw, and smaller marks scattered across her forehead like fallen stars. In certain lights, they seemed to shimmer. In others, they looked like scars from wounds that had never healed. Meloria recoiled from her newborn daughter, as if she had been struck. The healers tried to assure her that the marks were merely birthmarks, unusual but harmless. The midwife whispered that such patterns sometimes appeared in old bloodlines, marks of forgotten heritage. But Meloria heard none of it. All she could see was the ruin of her plans, the destruction of her carefully constructed reputation. House Sunfall was a noble family, wealthy and respected, but they lived in a society that prized beauty above almost all else. A daughter with a marked face would be unmarriageable. She would be whispered about, pointed at, pitied. She would drag the family name into scandal. From that first night, Meloria made her decision. She ordered veils to be made, heavy, opaque things that would completely obscure her daughter's face. She moved Isira to the furthest wing of the estate, to rooms that faced away from the main house and received few visitors. She instructed the servants to speak of the child as little as possible, to treat her existence as an unfortunate secret that must be managed. When Ophelia was born 3 years later, perfect, golden, unmarked, Meloria's approach solidified into stone. Ophelia would be the heir in all but name. Ophelia would receive the education, the training, the social exposure. Ophelia would be the face of House Sunfall, and Isira would be the sister no one mentioned. The years that followed were lonely ones for the marked child. She was not permitted to attend lessons with tutors or to join her sister in the sunny parlors where Ophelia learned to dance and charm and manipulate. She was not taken to festivals or celebrations or the countless social gatherings that filled the calendar of noble families. Instead, Isira learned to entertain herself. She found solace in books, thick, dusty volumes that the servants brought her from forgotten corners of the family library. She read histories and poetry, philosophy and folklore. She discovered languages her mother had never heard of, and lost herself in stories of distant lands and ancient times. She learned to observe from windows and doorways, watching the patterns of sunlight on stone, the way servants moved through their daily routines, the subtle politics that played out in whispered conversations and meaningful glances. Without the distraction of social demands, she developed an almost preternatural ability to read people, to sense the truths hiding beneath their careful masks. Most importantly, she learned to be alone without being destroyed by loneliness. This was perhaps her greatest achievement, though no one but herself would ever know it. Where another child might have crumbled under such rejection, might have become bitter or broken or desperate for any scrap of affection, Isira found something different within herself. She found a quiet strength, a deep well of calm that could not be disturbed by her mother's coldness or her sister's cruelty. She learned that her worth did not depend on others acknowledging it. But she still wondered, in the darkest hours of the night, why she had been born this way, why the marks had chosen her face, why she had been made into something that must be hidden. The answers, had she known where to look, lay in the very books she so loved. They lay in forgotten passages about the first Lunas, women born with silver markings that connected them to the moon's power, women who had once stood beside Alpha Kings and helped them rule with wisdom and grace. They lay in prophecies that spoke of marked children who would one day restore balance to kingdoms torn apart by violence and ambition. But those passages had been carefully removed from the Sunfall Library generations ago, and Isira grew up never knowing what she truly was. What she did know was simpler and more painful. She was unwanted. She was hidden. She was the shameful secret her family wished did not exist. And yet she survived. She survived her 10th birthday, which passed without acknowledgement, while Ophelia's was celebrated with a grand party. She survived her 16th year, when other girls her age were being presented to society while she remained locked in her distant rooms. She survived her 20th birthday, and her 25th and her 30th, each year adding another layer to the quiet armor she had built around her heart. By the time she reached 32, Isira Sunfall had become something her family never anticipated. A woman of profound inner strength, sharp intelligence, and unshakable dignity. She had not been broken by her circumstances. She had been forged by them. But none of that mattered to Meloria, who still saw only the marks and the shame they represented. When the invitation arrived announcing the Alpha King's ball, his search for a queen, Meloria's excitement was palpable. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. Ophelia was 29 now, considered past her prime by some standards, but still beautiful enough to capture a king's attention. If she could secure an alliance with Wolfsreach, House Sunfall would rise to heights Meloria had only dreamed of. The decision to bring Isira was purely practical. Someone needed to carry Ophelia's extra accessories, to handle any emergencies with her gown, to serve as an invisible assistant throughout the evening. Isira would be veiled as always. She would stay in the shadows, as always. She would be unseen. Meloria never imagined that the Alpha King's eyes would find her daughter in those shadows. She never imagined that destiny had been waiting all along. The dance ended, but Merrick did not release her hand. Instead, he led her to a quiet alcove near one of the towering windows, away from the curious stares and whispered speculations of the court. The moonlight streamed through the glass, silver and pure, and it seemed to gather around Isira like a blessing. Merrick could not stop looking at her. Even with the veil obscuring her features, she captivated him in ways he could not explain. It was not merely physical attraction, though the graceful lines of her body and the elegant way she moved certainly appealed to him. It was something deeper, something that resonated in the very marrow of his bones. His wolf was utterly calm now, which was remarkable in itself. The beast that had driven him through countless battles and political schemes, the primal force that usually paced restlessly within him, had settled into a state of profound peace, as if it had finally found what it had been searching for. "Tell me about yourself," he said, and he realized he genuinely wanted to know. This was not the polite small talk of a king entertaining a noble. This was the sincere curiosity of a man who had just discovered something precious. Isira was quiet for a moment. She was not accustomed to being asked such questions. She was not accustomed to anyone caring about her answers. "There is not much to tell, Your Majesty," she said finally. "I am no one of consequence. My mother has made that abundantly clear. I find that difficult to believe. Because you do not know me. Then let me know you." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. "Tell me what you love. Tell me what you dream. Tell me what fills the hours of your days." Isira's hands twisted together in her lap. No one had ever asked her these things. No one had ever cared. "I love books," she said slowly, the words feeling strange on her tongue because she had never spoken them aloud to anyone. "I love the way stories can take you to places you will never see and introduce you to people who lived centuries ago. I love learning new languages, discovering new ways of thinking." She paused, surprised by her own candor. "I dream of being useful, of contributing something of value to the world. I dream of being seen as more than a burden to be hidden away." Marek felt his heart clench. He had conquered nations. He had built an empire from the ashes of war. He had faced down enemies who wanted his throne and his life, and he had never once wavered. But this quiet confession from a veiled woman in a shadowed corner unmanned him completely. "You are not a burden," he said, and there was steel in his voice. "Whoever told you, that was wrong. My entire family told me that, every day of my life." "Then your entire family are fools." Isira made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "You cannot possibly know that. You do not know what lies beneath this veil. If you did—" "If I did what?" Marek interrupted. "Would I be disgusted? Would I turn away? Would I agree with those who call you ugly?" He shook his head slowly. "I have seen true ugliness, Lady Isira. I have seen it in the hearts of men who smile while they betray. I have seen it in the cruelty of those who prey upon the weak. I have seen it in the faces of enemies who would slaughter innocents for power." His voice softened. "Nothing you could show me beneath that veil would be uglier than the treatment you have received from those who should have loved you." Tears gathered in Isira's eyes, hidden by the veil but burning nonetheless. When had anyone ever spoken to her with such fierce kindness? When had anyone ever defended her? "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you saying these things to me? You do not know me. I am nobody." Marek reached out and took her hands in his. His palms were rough with sword calluses and battle scars, but his touch was infinitely gentle. "I do not understand it myself," he admitted. "From the moment I saw you standing in that corner, something within me recognized something within you. My wolf, the beast that drives all alphas, has never reacted to anyone the way it reacted to you tonight." He met her veiled gaze with his dark eyes. "I believe we are connected, Lady Isira. I believe we have been connected since before either of us was born." She should have laughed. She should have dismissed his words as romantic nonsense or courtly flattery. But she felt it too. Had felt it from the moment he first spoke to her. A pull, a recognition, as if some part of her had been waiting for him without knowing it. "That sounds like madness," she said quietly. "Perhaps it is." He smiled slightly, and the expression transformed his fierce face into something almost gentle. "But if it is madness, I find I do not mind." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of footsteps. Sharp, angry footsteps that announced Meloria's arrival before she appeared around the corner of the alcove. Her face was pale with fury, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Your Majesty," she said, the words stiff with barely concealed rage. "I must apologize for my daughter's intrusion upon your evening. She should not have—" "Lady Sunfall," Merrick's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "You will apologize for nothing on Lady Isira's behalf, because Lady Isira has done nothing requiring apology. She has been a delightful companion, and I am grateful for her company." Meloria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "But surely—" Furthermore, Merrick rose to his full height, towering over the matriarch with all the intimidating presence of his station. "I find myself curious about a great many things I have witnessed tonight. I am curious why Lady Isira was hidden in a corner while her sister paraded through the ballroom. I am curious why she wears a veil so heavy it obscures her face entirely. I am curious why you look at your own daughter as though she is something shameful." Meloria's face drained of color. "Your Majesty, I can explain." "I do not require your explanations." His voice dropped to something dangerous. "I require your absence. Take your younger daughter and leave this alcove. Lady Isira will return to you when she is ready." It was not a request. It was not a suggestion. It was a command from the most powerful alpha in the realm, and Meloria had no choice but to obey. She retreated with one last venomous glance at Isira, a look that promised consequences later, when the king was no longer watching. But for now, she was powerless. When they were alone again, Merrick turned back to Isira with something like admiration in his eyes. "You handled that well," he said. "I handled nothing. I merely sat here while you defended me. You did not crumble. You did not apologize. You did not try to smooth over her rudeness with false pleasantries." He nodded slowly. "That requires a kind of strength that most people never develop." Isira was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, "I learned long ago that apologizing for my existence did not make anyone treat me better. It only made them treat me worse." Merrick's jaw tightened. The more he learned of her circumstances, the more his protective instincts roared to life. He wanted to shelter her from the cruelty of her family. He wanted to show her what she was truly worth. He wanted her. Simply and completely. His wolf had chosen, and Merrick found he had no desire to resist. But he was also wise enough to know that she was not ready. She had been hurt too deeply, hidden too long, to suddenly accept the intensity of what he was offering. He would need to be patient. He would need to earn her trust. For now, that meant letting her go. "The hour grows late," he said gently. "I should return you to your family before rumors grow even more fevered than they already are." He paused. "But I would like to see you again, Lady Isira." "Would you permit me to call upon you?" Isira's heart stuttered. I am not certain that would be wise." "Wise?" He almost smiled. "No, probably not. But I have never been particularly interested in wisdom when it conflicts with what I want." "And what do you want?" He held her gaze, and even through the veil, she felt the intensity of it like a physical touch. "To know you," he said simply. "To understand you. To discover whether this connection between us is real or merely the fancy of an overambitious wolf." He took her hands one more time. "Will you give me that chance, Lady Isira? Will you let me prove that you are worth so much more than you have been led to believe?" She should say no. She should retreat to the shadows where she belonged, where she was safe from the inevitably of disappointment. She should protect herself from hoping, because hope had only ever brought her pain. But something in his eyes, something fierce and tender and utterly sincere, made her believe. "Yes," she whispered, "I will give you that chance." The days following the ball were a study in chaos and tension at the Sunfall estate. Meloria raged for hours after their return, her fury filling the halls like poison gas. How dare the Alpha King show interest in that creature? How dare Isira draw attention to herself? How dare she ruin everything Meloria had worked so hard to achieve? Ophelia was worse in her own way, cold, calculating, and consumed by jealousy. She had been the center of attention her entire life. She had been raised to believe that men would fall at her feet, that her beauty guaranteed her success, and yet the Alpha King had walked past her without a second glance, drawn instead to the sister everyone agreed was ugly. It was intolerable. It was humiliating. It was unforgivable. Together, mother and daughter plotted. They would not allow this aberration to continue. They would find a way to remind everyone, including the Alpha King, that Isira was not fit for polite society, let alone a throne. But their schemes were interrupted 3 days later, when a royal messenger arrived at the estate bearing a letter sealed with the Wolf's Reach crest. The Alpha King requested the pleasure of Lady Isira Sunfall's company at the palace. Meloria nearly fainted from the shock. She tried to refuse on Isira's behalf. She tried to claim her daughter was ill, unavailable, otherwise engaged. But the messenger was implacable. The king had been very specific. Lady Isira, no one else. And refusal was not an option. So Isira was dressed, hurriedly, carelessly, in her plainest gown, and sent to the palace with a warning ringing in her ears. "Do not embarrass this family," Meloria hissed, as Isira climbed into the carriage. "Do not forget your place, and whatever you do, keep that veil on. If anyone sees those marks, we are all ruined." Isira said nothing. She simply settled into the carriage seat and watched the estate disappear behind her, feeling something like anticipation flutter in her chest for the first time in years. The palace was overwhelming in its grandeur. Towers of pale stone reached toward the sky, and gardens sprawled across the grounds in carefully cultivated beauty. Guards in silver armor flanked every entrance, their eyes watchful and their bearing disciplined. The scent of pine and snow and something wild, wolf, Isira realized, permeated the air. She was escorted through gleaming corridors and past tapestries depicting ancient battles, past servants who stared at her veiled figure with undisguised curiosity, past doors of carved oak and windows of colored glass. Finally, she was brought to a private study. Marek was waiting for her. He rose when she entered, and something in his expression shifted, softened, at the sight of her. He dismissed the servant with a word, and gestured for Isira to take a seat near the fireplace, where warmth and the scent of burning cedar filled the air. "Thank you for coming," he said, and there was genuine gratitude in his voice. "Did I have a choice?" He considered the question seriously. "You always have a choice, Lady Isira. I would never force you to do anything against your will. But I confess I hoped very much that you would choose to come." She settled into the chair, her hands folded in her lap, her veiled face turned toward the fire. "Why did you summon me?" "Because I could not stop thinking about you." He moved to the chair across from her, his large frame somehow managing to appear less intimidating in the intimate setting. "Because every moment since the ball, my wolf has been restless, demanding that I find you again. Because I needed to see you." She was quiet for a moment. Then softly, she said, "You barely know me." "I know enough." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "I know you have been treated badly by people who should have cherished you. I know you have strength and intelligence that your family has tried to suppress. I know that something connects us, something I have never felt with anyone else." He paused. "And I know that I want to understand what that connection means. What if it means nothing? What if it is merely an unusual reaction, a passing fancy? Then I will have enjoyed the time I spent discovering that, but I do not believe it is nothing." His voice dropped. "Do you?" Isira's heart pounded beneath her plain gown. She had spent so long expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, protecting herself from the devastation of disappointment. But sitting here with him, feeling the warmth of his attention focused entirely on her, She could not deny the truth. "No," she admitted. "I do not believe it is nothing." Merrick's face transformed with something like joy. "Then will you allow me to pursue this? Will you permit me to court you?" The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. A king courting a hidden, veiled woman. A ruler seeking the hand of someone his court would consider unsuitable. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet, "I must tell you something first," Isira said. "Something you may not understand, but which you deserve to know." "Tell me." She took a deep breath. "Beneath this veil I am marked. Silver patterns on my skin, like scars or tattoos, covering part of my face. I was born with them, and I have been hidden because of them for my entire life. My mother believes they are signs of ill fortune. My family considers them shameful." She lifted her chin. "If you court me and those marks are discovered, it will cause a scandal. You will be mocked for choosing someone disfigured. Your court will question your judgment." Merrick was silent for a long moment, studying her through the veil that separated them. Then, slowly, he rose from his chair and crossed to kneel before her. "May I?" he asked softly, his hand hovering near her face. She trembled, but nodded. He lifted the edge of her veil, gently, carefully, as if he were handling something infinitely precious. The fabric rose, revealing first her chin, then her lips. Then he stopped breathing. The marks were there, exactly as she had described. Silver tracings that curved across her cheek like frozen lightning, that scattered across her forehead like fallen stars, that traced the line of her jaw like an artist's signature. In the firelight, they seemed to shimmer, but her face was beautiful. Not the conventional beauty of Ophelia, with her golden hair and emerald eyes. This was something older, something deeper. High cheekbones and a strong jaw. Eyes the color of winter moonlight, pale and clear and filled with ancient wisdom. Lips that curved with quiet dignity, despite a lifetime of cruelty. And the marks themselves. They were not disfigurements. They were decorations. They made her look like something out of legend, a creature touched by powers beyond mortal understanding. Merrick's wolf howled with recognition. Luna. The marks of a Luna, the bloodline of the moon. "You are not disfigured," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are marked. There is a difference." He took her hands in his. "These patterns on your skin, I have seen them before. In ancient texts, in forgotten histories, in prophecies my advisors dismiss as myth." He met her eyes with fierce intensity. "You carry the blood of the first Lunas, Isira. You are not cursed. You are blessed." Isira stared at him, tears beginning to fall down her marked cheeks. "I do not understand." "Neither do I. Not fully." He pressed his forehead to her hands. "But I intend to find out. I intend to discover what you truly are and help you become what you were always meant to be." He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw something she had never expected to see directed at her. Devotion. "If you will let me." Through her tears, Isira smiled. What followed was both the most wonderful and most complicated period of Isira's life. Merrick could not openly court her. Not yet. The political ramifications of an alpha king choosing a veiled, supposedly disfigured woman over the countless suitable candidates would be catastrophic without careful preparation. His council would rebel. His nobles would question his sanity. His enemies would use it against him. So they devised a different plan. Publicly, Isira was brought to the palace as a potential lady-in-waiting, a minor position that required no beauty and attracted little attention. She was given rooms in a quiet wing, far from the bustle of court life, but with easy access to the royal library and private chambers. Privately, everything was different. Merrick spent hours with her every day, hidden from prying eyes. He taught her the history of the realm, the complex web of alliances and enmities that governed politics. He explained the responsibilities of a Luna, a queen consort, and prepared her for the role she would one day fill. He brought her ancient texts about the marked bloodlines, and together they pieced together the truth of her heritage. The first Lunas had been women of extraordinary power, born with silver marks that connected them to the moon itself. They could sense truth from lies, calm the beast within alpha wolves, and channel ancient energies that help stabilize kingdoms. For generations, they had ruled alongside alpha kings, bringing balance and wisdom to brutal power. But the Luna bloodlines had faded over the centuries, diluted by marriages to ordinary humans, forgotten by families who no longer understood their significance. The marks still appeared occasionally, unexpected gifts from distant ancestors. But without understanding, these marked children were treated as aberrations rather than blessings. Isira was one of those children. Her marks were not curses, they were inheritances. "You were born to stand beside a king," Merrick told her one night, as they sat together in his private study with ancient scrolls spread before them. "You were born to be a Luna." "I was born to be hidden away and forgotten," she countered, though there was no bitterness in her voice anymore. Only wonder. No one knew. Not even me. "Your family failed you. Your society failed you. But I will not." He took her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the silver marks that he had come to love. "You are my Luna, Isira. In secret for now, but one day, before all the world." She leaned into his touch, still amazed by his gentleness. This man who commanded armies, who could crush enemies with a glance, who radiated power and danger like heat from a flame. He held her as if she were made of spun glass. "I do not deserve this," she whispered. "You deserve everything." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corners of her marked mouth. "And I will spend my life proving it to you." Their love deepened slowly, carefully, like a flower blooming in protected soil. Merrick showed her a side of himself that no one else saw, the doubts that plagued him late at night, the loneliness of ruling alone, the fear that he would never find someone who loved him rather than his crown. And Isira showed him the depths of her quiet strength, the resilience that had carried her through decades of rejection, the intelligence that had sharpened in isolation, the gentle wisdom that saw through pretense and into truth. They became each other's sanctuary, each other's secret, each other's hope. But secrets have a way of wanting to be discovered. 6 months passed. 6 months of stolen moments and whispered confessions, of careful planning and growing love. Isra flourished in the palace environment, her natural talents finally given room to grow. She advised Merrick on diplomatic matters, her ability to read people proving invaluable in negotiations. She helped him see through the flattery of courtiers to the ambitions beneath. She became, in every way that mattered, his partner. The court noticed the change in their king. Marek Wolfsreach had always been fierce, a warrior king who had won his throne through blood and determination. His temper was legendary, his judgment swift and often brutal. But in recent months something had shifted. He seemed calmer, more patient. His decisions reflected a broader perspective, a deeper consideration of consequences. His enemies grew uneasy. A calm alpha king was often more dangerous than a raging one. His allies grew curious. What had changed him? And in the Sunfall estate, Meloria and Ophelia grew suspicious. Isira's letters home were brief and uninformative. She was well, she was performing her duties, she hoped her family was also well. Nothing about her true position. Nothing about her relationship with the king. Nothing about the Luna bloodline that they had spent her entire life trying to suppress. But rumors reached the estate nonetheless. Whispers about a veiled woman who was often seen in the king's company. Speculation about why a minor lady-in-waiting warranted so much royal attention. Meloria sent spies. Ophelia made her own inquiries through noble contacts at court. Slowly, piece by piece, they assembled a picture that filled them with equal parts fury and terror. The marked sister, the ugly one, the shameful one, had somehow captured the Alpha King's interest, and she had to be stopped. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Through her noble contacts, Ophelia had managed to secure an invitation to a grand ceremony at the palace, a celebration of the autumn harvest, attended by all the most important families in the realm. Meloria would accompany her, using the event as cover for their true purpose. They would expose Ysira's marks before the entire court. They would reveal her as the disfigured creature she truly was, the shameful secret that House Sunfall had tried to hide. In the presence of hundreds of nobles, they would rip away her veil and show everyone the face that no respectable man should ever desire. The scandal would be devastating. The king's judgment would be questioned. Ysira would be humiliated beyond recovery. And Ophelia, the beautiful sister, would be there to comfort the embarrassed monarch, to offer herself as a more suitable alternative, to finally claim the crown that should have been hers from the beginning. They arrived at the palace with honey smiles and poison hearts, dressed in their finest gowns, their intentions hidden behind masks of courtly civility. They mingled with the other guests, gathering support for their scheme, subtly suggesting that something inappropriate was occurring between the king and the veiled lady-in-waiting. By the time the ceremony began, they had planted seeds of doubt throughout the court. Ysira knew something was wrong the moment she saw her mother and sister enter the great hall. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up in warning. Her stomach churned with premonition. She found Merrick immediately, pulling him aside with urgency she had never shown before. "They are here," she said, her voice tight with fear. "My mother, my sister. They would not have come without reason." Merrick's expression hardened into something dangerous. "They cannot touch you here. You are under my protection. They do not need to touch me to destroy me." Her hands trembled. They could reveal the marks, in front of everyone. The scandal would what? He took her hands firmly. Would embarrass them, expose their cruelty, force the court to see what they have done to their own daughter. "It would embarrass you, make you look foolish for choosing someone like me." "Someone like you?" His voice dropped to something fierce. "You mean someone brilliant and compassionate and stronger than anyone they have ever met? Someone who carries the blood of Lunas in her veins? Someone I love?" Ysira's breath caught. It was the first time he had said the words aloud. "I love you, Ysira Sunfall," Merrick continued, his dark eyes burning with intensity. "I love your strength and your wisdom, and yes, I love those marks that your family tried to hide. I love everything about you, and I will not pretend otherwise. But the court will learn what I have learned, that beauty comes in many forms, and that the most valuable qualities cannot be seen on the surface." He cupped her face in his hands. "I had planned to wait, to prepare the court gradually, to build support among my allies before revealing our relationship. But perhaps it is time to stop waiting. Perhaps it is time to show them who you truly are." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted on the other side of the great hall. Meloria's voice, raised in theatrical horror. "There she is, the woman who has bewitched our king, my own daughter, the marked one, the cursed one, hiding behind her veil like the shameful creature she is." The crowd parted, faces turning toward Ysira with shock and curiosity. Ophelia moved through the gap, her beautiful face twisted with righteous anger. "For too long my sister has hidden her true nature from the world," Ophelia declared, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent hall. "She was born disfigured, marked with signs of ill fortune, and our family protected this kingdom from her presence. But somehow, she has wormed her way into the king's favor, using deception and manipulation to— That is quite enough." Merrick's voice cut through Ophelia's speech like a blade through silk. He stepped forward, placing himself between the Sunfall women and Isira, his presence radiating authority that silenced every whisper. "You come into my palace," he said, his tone deadly calm, "and you dare to speak of manipulation? Of deception?" He turned to address the assembled nobles, his bearing every inch the Alpha King. "Let me tell you what I know of Lady Isira Sunfall." The court held its breath. She was born with marks that her family could not understand. Rather than seeking knowledge, rather than protecting their child, they chose to hide her like something shameful. They denied her education, denied her society, denied her any chance at a normal life. They called her ugly. They called her cursed. They called her the sister no one should see. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But they were wrong. Merrick's voice rose with conviction. They were wrong about everything. Those marks that they taught her to hide? They are not signs of ill fortune. They are signs of power, the marks of the ancient Luna bloodlines, women who once stood beside Alpha Kings and helped them rule with wisdom and grace. Gasps echoed through the hall. The Luna bloodlines were legend, spoken of in old stories and dismissed by modern minds. For the Alpha King to claim such things. "I have spent months researching this," Merrick continued. "I have consulted ancient texts and forgotten histories, and I have found the truth. Lady Isira carries the blood of the first Lunas in her veins. She is not cursed, she is blessed, and she has been my secret Luna for half a year now. My advisor, my partner, my love." Meloria made a strangled sound of horror. Ophelia's face went pale with rage. Merrick turned back to Isira, who stood frozen with shock and overwhelming emotion. He crossed to her, took her hands in his, and looked at her with all the tenderness he had shown her in private, now displayed before hundreds of witnesses. "I had planned to do this differently," he said softly. "I had planned to prepare you, to give you time. But it seems the moment has chosen us." He released one of her hands and reached for the edge of her veil. "May I?" Tears streamed down Isira's cheeks beneath the silver fabric. Her entire life had led to this moment. Every cruel word, every lonely night, every year spent believing she was something to be ashamed of. "Yes," she whispered. Merrick lifted her veil. The gasps that filled the hall were not sounds of horror. They were sounds of wonder. Because in the candlelight of the great hall, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, Isira's marks began to glow. The silver tracings across her face shimmered and brightened, pulsing with a soft luminescence that spoke of powers beyond mortal understanding. Her hair, white as winter snow, usually dulled by shadow, seemed to catch and amplify the light, creating a halo around her pale features. Her eyes, opened wide with surprise, reflected the moon's radiance. She was not disfigured. She was divine. The court fell to its knees. Not because they had been commanded, but because some instinct older than civilization recognized what they were seeing. A Luna awakened. A power restored. A blessing made manifest. Meloria and Ophelia stood alone in the prostrating crowd, their faces masks of disbelief and dawning terror. Their plan had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. They had tried to expose a shameful secret, and instead, they had revealed a miracle. Merrick caught Isira as her knees buckled, the sudden surge of awakened power overwhelming her unprepared body. He held her against his chest, supporting her weight as the glow slowly faded, leaving only the steady shimmer of her marks in the candlelight. "I have you," he murmured against her hair. "I have you. It is over now. Everything is going to be different from this moment on." She clung to him, trembling with the aftermath of the awakening, tears still falling freely. But for the first time in 32 years, they were tears of joy. The months that followed transformed everything. Isira was formally recognized as the Alpha King's intended, her position elevated from hidden lady-in-waiting to future Queen Luna. The ancient traditions surrounding Luna bloodlines were researched and revived, their significance explained to a court that had long forgotten them. She was given tutors to help her understand her awakening powers, the ability to sense truth from lies, to calm the beast in alpha wolves, to connect with the moon's energy in ways that strengthened the kingdom's magic. These were gifts that had laid dormant within her all her life, suppressed by shame and isolation, now finally free to flourish. Merrick remained by her side through every step of the journey. He was patient when her training frustrated her, proud when she achieved breakthroughs, protective when courtiers whispered doubts, and always, always devoted. The man who was feared throughout the realm as a ruthless warrior became something different in her presence. Gentler, softer, more human. The court learned to see the duality that Azira had always witnessed. In public, Marek was the Alpha King. Fierce, commanding, dangerous to his enemies. His reputation for swift and brutal justice remained unchanged. His army feared and worshipped him in equal measure. His rivals knew that challenging him meant destruction. But with Azira, he was transformed. He sought her counsel on matters of state, trusting her insight and her ability to read people. He deferred to her judgment in diplomatic situations, recognizing that her decades of observation had given her skills he lacked. He held her hand during difficult meetings, drew strength from her steady presence, and never once made her feel as if her role was merely decorative. She was his equal, his partner, his Luna in every sense of the word. And she bloomed under his devotion. The woman who had spent her life trying to disappear learned to take up space. She spoke her opinions in council meetings. She intervened when she saw injustice. She used her ability to sense truth, to protect the kingdom from traitors and manipulators. She became, against all expectations, one of the most influential figures in the realm. Meloria and Ophelia watched this transformation from their drastically diminished position. After the failed exposure at the harvest ceremony, their reputation had crumbled. The court knew now how they had treated Azira, how they had hidden her away, called her ugly, denied her every opportunity. Where once they had been respected members of noble society, now they were whispered about as cruel and short-sighted, women who had failed to recognize a Luna in their own household. Their political influence evaporated. Their social invitations dried up. They returned to the Sunfall estate in disgrace, forced to watch from afar as the daughter they had dismissed rose to heights they had never imagined. Azira, to their eternal surprise, did not seek revenge. When Merrick offered to punish them for their years of cruelty, exile perhaps, or the seizure of their properties, Azira refused. She said she had spent enough of her life defined by their treatment of her. She would not continue to let them shape her choices. Instead, she simply moved forward. She built a new life, a new identity, a new understanding of herself. She let go of the pain they had caused, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because she deserved peace. It was, perhaps, the strongest thing she ever did. The wedding took place in spring, when the mountain valleys around Wolf's Reach Palace burst with wildflowers, and the air hummed with the promise of new life. Azira wore a gown of silver and midnight blue, the colors that had become her signature since the awakening. Her marks glowed softly throughout the ceremony, a visible sign of the blessing she carried. Her white hair was woven with moonflowers and tiny crystals that caught the light. She walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, no family to stand beside her. Meloria and Ophelia had not been invited, and Azira had no other relatives who acknowledged her existence. She could have asked one of her new friends at court to escort her. She could have walked on Merrick's arm, a symbol of their partnership. Instead, she chose to make this journey by herself. Every step was a declaration. I am not shameful. I am not hidden. I am not someone who needs others to validate my worth. The entire court watched as the woman who had been called ugly walked with the dignity of a queen. They saw the calm in her pale eyes, the grace in her movements, the quiet strength that radiated from her like moonlight. They saw Luna. Merrick waited for her at the altar, his usual fierce expression softened by something like awe. He had seen her in many moments over the past year, vulnerable and strong, uncertain and confident, heartbroken and healed. But he had never seen her quite like this. She was luminous, transcendent. The answer to prayers he hadn't known he was making. When she reached him, he took her hands and simply said, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." She smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "You changed my life. You changed mine first." He lifted one of her hands to his lips. "From the moment I saw you in that corner, hiding in your veil, something in me knew. My wolf recognized you before my mind did. My heart followed soon after." His voice dropped to something only she could hear. "I spent decades believing I would rule alone, that there was no one who could match me, who could stand beside me, who could love the man beneath the crown. Then I found you, hiding in the shadows. And everything made sense." The ceremony was traditional in most respects. Vows spoken, blessings invoked, promises made before witnesses. But when the priest announced them as king and Luna Queen, something extraordinary happened. The marks on Isira's face blazed with light, not the soft glow of the awakening, but something brighter, more powerful. The same light began to emanate from Merrick, silver threads appearing on his skin that mirrored hers, connecting them in ways visible to everyone present. A mating bond. The court gasped as they witnessed what few had ever seen, the physical manifestation of a true mate connection between an alpha king and his Luna. The silver light wound between them like living vines, binding them not just legally, but spiritually, magically, eternally. When the light faded, Merrick bore matching marks on his own face, fainter than hers, but unmistakably present. Signs of their bond. Signs that they were two halves of a single whole. He touched the new marks with wonder. "It seems I have been decorated as well," he said softly. Isira laughed through her tears. "Now you understand what it is like." "I understand everything now." He pulled her into his arms before the entire court, propriety forgotten. "I understand that I would wear these marks for 1,000 lifetimes if it meant standing beside you." Their kiss sealed the ceremony and began their reign. The years that followed were golden ones for Wolf's Reach. Under the joint rule of the Alpha King and his Luna Queen, the kingdom flourished. Old traditions were revived and new ones established. The Luna bloodlines were honored once more, and children born with silver marks were celebrated rather than hidden. Marek proved to be a wise and just ruler, his earlier reputation for brutality tempered by Isira's influence. He remained fierce when fierceness was needed. His enemies still trembled at his name, and his justice was still swift and merciless when warranted. But he also became known for fairness, for listening to all sides before passing judgment, for caring about the welfare of even the least of his subjects. Isira stood beside him through everything. She attended council meetings and diplomatic negotiations, her ability to sense truth proving invaluable in detecting lies and manipulation. She established programs to support vulnerable members of society, the poor, the sick, those who had been marginalized and forgotten. She never forgot what it was like to be dismissed and ignored, and she used her power to ensure others did not suffer the same fate. Together, they navigated political challenges and personal ones. There were years of abundance and years of hardship. There were victories that filled the kingdom with joy, and losses that tested their resolve. Through all of it, they remained united. Their partnership became legendary. Neighboring kingdoms spoke of the Alpha King who had chosen a marked woman over conventional beauties, and found in her his perfect match. They spoke of the Luna Queen, whose gentle wisdom balanced her husband's fierce strength. They spoke of a love that seemed to grow stronger with each passing year. immune to the strains that destroyed so many royal marriages. What those distant observers didn't see were the quiet moments that made the legend possible. They didn't see Merrick holding Ysera through nights when old fears resurfaced, when the voice of her mother still whispered that she was worthless. They didn't see Ysera calming his wolf when political frustrations drove him to the edge of violence. They didn't see the hours they spent simply talking, sharing thoughts and dreams and fears that neither would reveal to anyone else. They didn't see the way Merrick still looked at her after 20 years of marriage with the same wonder he had shown on their wedding day. They didn't see the way Ysera still reached for his hand when she was uncertain, finding in his touch the strength she had never found anywhere else. They didn't see a love that had been forged in hiding and tempered by hardship and proven stronger than any challenge the world could throw at it. But the people of Wolf's Reach saw, and they loved their rulers all the more for it. 40 years passed like a river finding its way to the sea. Ysera's hair remained white, though whether from age or her Luna bloodline, no one could say. Her marks still shimmered on her skin, eternal as the moon itself. Her face bore the lines of a life fully lived, laughter lines around her eyes, worry lines on her forehead, smile lines bracketing her mouth. She was 72 years old, and she had never felt more alive. Merrick had given her everything she had never dared to hope for: a home, a purpose, a love that had never wavered, children who had grown into fine adults, one of whom would one day inherit the throne, a legacy that would outlast them both. And now, he was dying. The illness had come slowly at first, a persistent cough, a gradual weakening, a dimming of the fierce light in his dark eyes. The court healers had tried everything. Ancient rituals were performed. Rare medicines were procured from distant lands. Prayers were offered to every deity who might listen. Nothing worked. Marek Wolfsreach, the Alpha King who had conquered armies and survived assassination attempts, and ruled with iron strength for half a century, was losing his final battle. Ysera stayed by his side through every moment. She held his hand through the painful treatments. She read to him when he was too weak to hold a book. She slept in his chambers every night, waking at every labored breath, unable to bear the thought of him facing anything alone. She did not weep where he could see. She would not burden him with her grief when he had his own to carry. Instead, she saved her tears for the hours before dawn, when exhaustion finally drove him to sleep, and she could let herself feel the approaching loss. It was devastating. It was unbearable, and she would not have traded a single moment of it. On the last night, the moon hung full and silver over the palace, its light streaming through the windows of the royal chamber. Merrick's breathing had grown shallow, his grip on her hand weakening with each passing hour. But his eyes, those dark eyes that had first seen her across a crowded ballroom, still held a spark of the man he had always been. "Do you remember," he said softly, "the night we met?" Ysera smiled through the tears she could no longer hold back. "How could I forget? You terrified me." Terrified? A ghost of his old laugh. I was the one who was terrified. This beautiful woman hidden in the corner, and my wolf howling that she was mine, and I had no idea how to convince her that she deserved to be loved. You convinced me. She brought his hand to her lips, kissing his scarred knuckles. You convinced me every day for 40 years. Was it enough? His voice was barely a whisper now. Did I make up for what they did to you? Did I show you how much you were always worth? The tears fell freely now, streaming down her marked cheeks, glowing faintly in the moonlight. You showed me more than I ever knew existed. You gave me a life I never dared to imagine. You taught me that I was not something to be hidden, but something to be cherished. She leaned down and pressed her forehead to his, as they had done 1,000 times before. You loved me, Merrick, truly and completely, and I loved you the same way. Nothing they did to me before could touch what we built together. His hand rose, trembling, to trace the marks on her face one last time. My Luna, he breathed. My beautiful, impossible Luna. I would do it all again. Every battle, every challenge, every moment of fear, I would face it all again if it meant finding you. And I would wait in every shadow, hoping you would see me. He smiled then, the smile she had fallen in love with 40 years ago, fierce and tender and entirely for her. I will always see you, Isira, even where I am going, even in the dark. My wolf will find yours across any distance. His eyes began to close. She held him as his breathing slowed. She whispered words of love and gratitude against his cooling skin. She stayed with him until the last breath left his body, and the room fell silent, except for her keening grief. Merrick Wolfsreach, Alpha King of the realm, protector of his people, beloved of his Luna Queen, died with the moonlight on his face and his hand in hers, and Isira wept until there were no more tears left to shed. The kingdom mourned. For 3 days, the bells of every temple tolled without ceasing. For 3 days, no music was played, no celebrations held, no laughter allowed to disturb the overwhelming grief. The Alpha King had been more than a ruler. He had been a symbol of strength and justice and enduring love. His loss left a void that nothing could fill. Isira presided over the funeral ceremonies with the dignity that had become her signature. She wore black and silver, her white hair bound with mourning ribbons, her marked face composed despite the devastation within her. She accepted condolences from nobles and commoners alike, each one breaking her heart a little more. When the pyre was lit and Merrick's body returned to the elements, she felt something within her break as well. For 40 years, she had defined herself in relation to him. Wife, partner, queen, Luna. Without him, who was she? The answer came slowly, in the days and weeks that followed his death. She was still Isira Sunfall. She was still the woman who had survived decades of cruelty before finding love. She was still the Luna who had helped bring prosperity to a kingdom. She was still strong, still wise, still capable of standing alone. Merrick had not made her whole. He had helped her see the wholeness that was already there. And so, when the council convened to discuss the succession, when they debated whether the kingdom should pass immediately to her son or whether some other arrangement should be made, Isira made a decision that surprised everyone. She would continue to rule. "My husband trusted me to stand beside him for 40 years, she said, her voice steady despite the grief that still consumed her. He trusted me with his counsels, his secrets, his fears. He would not want that trust to end simply because he is no longer here to express it." The council exchanged uncertain glances. A Luna Queen ruling alone was unprecedented. The Alpha bloodline was supposed to pass from king to king, with Lunas as their partners, but never their successors. But Isira had spent 4 decades proving herself. She had earned the respect of every noble in the realm, every general in the army, every diplomat in foreign courts. She knew more about the kingdom's workings than anyone else alive, and she bore the marks of a true Luna, marks that still glowed when she channeled the moon's power, marks that proved her connection to forces older than the Alpha bloodlines themselves. The council agreed. The kingdom accepted. And Isira Sunfall, who had once been called the Ugly Sister, became the sole ruler of Wolfsreach. She reigned for another 20 years. They were not easy years. There were wars to be fought and won, alliances to be maintained, crises to be navigated. There were nobles who questioned her authority and enemies who tested her resolve, and challengers who believed a Luna Queen was simply weakness waiting to be exploited. They were all proven wrong. Isira ruled with a combination of wisdom and strength that defied expectations. She was not her husband. She did not have his physical power, his alpha aura, his capacity for violent intimidation. But she had something equally valuable: the accumulated insight of a lifetime spent observing, learning, waiting. She knew how to read people. She knew when to compromise and when to hold firm. She knew the difference between true loyalty and the false kind, between genuine threats and empty posturing. And she had the love of her people, a love that had grown through decades of witnessing her partnership with Merrick, her kindness to the vulnerable, her unshakable dignity in the face of every challenge. Under her rule, the kingdom continued to flourish. The reforms she and Merrick had begun together were completed. The Luna traditions became permanently embedded in the culture, ensuring that no marked child would ever again be hidden away in shame. The realm entered an era of peace and prosperity that historians would later call the Silver Age. She never remarried. There were offers. There were always offers when power and beauty combined. But she declined them all. She had experienced a love that most people only dreamed of. She had been seen, truly seen, by someone who chose to love every part of her. Nothing less would ever suffice. Instead, she found companionship in her children and grandchildren, in the friends she had made at court, in the memory of a fierce-eyed man who had knelt before her and promised to spend his life proving her worth. Some nights, when the moon was full, she swore she could feel him beside her. Her wolf stirred within her, reaching for his across the barrier of death. And though she knew it was probably just memory and longing, she liked to believe that some part of their bond remained intact. Isira Sunfall died at the age of 92, surrounded by her family and bathed in moonlight. Her passing was peaceful, a simple slipping away, a releasing of breath, a journey toward the reunion she had been waiting for since the night Merrick left her. The marks on her face glowed one final time, brighter than they had since her awakening, before fading into the ordinary silver they had been at birth. The kingdom mourned again, though this time the grief was tinged with celebration. They had been blessed with an extraordinary ruler, a woman who had risen from the shadows to command a nation, a Luna who had proven that true strength came from within, not from the circumstances of one's birth or the opinions of others. She was buried beside Merrick, their tombs touching just as their lives had touched. The inscription on her memorial told the story in simple words. Here lies Isira Sunfall Wolfsreach, Luna Queen. She was hidden behind a veil. She was called ugly. She was everything her kingdom needed. She was loved. The legend that grew around her name would outlast the kingdom itself. They told stories of the marked girl who had been hidden away by her family, treated as shameful and worthless and invisible. They told of the Alpha King who had seen through the veil to the woman beneath, who had recognized her true nature when no one else could. They told of a love that had transformed them both, turning a fierce warrior into a tender husband and a broken woman into a queen. But mostly, they told of Isira herself. They told of her strength, forged in years of solitude and rejection. They told of her wisdom, developed through decades of observation and thought. They told of her compassion, born from her own experience of cruelty. They told of her dignity, unshakable in the face of everything the world threw at her. They told of a woman who had been taught she was nothing, and who had proved herself to be everything. And in the centuries that followed, whenever a child was born with unusual marks or unexpected differences, their parents would tell them the story of the Luna Queen who had come from the shadows. They would say that being different was not a curse, but a gift. They would say that the world might not always recognize worth when it saw it, but that truth had a way of emerging eventually. They would say, "Look at Isira Sunfall. Look at what she became. You can become anything too." It was, perhaps, the greatest legacy she could have left. The moon still rises over the ruins of Wolfsreach Palace, casting its silver light over crumbled walls and overgrown gardens. The kingdom has been gone for 500 years, absorbed by larger nations, forgotten by all but scholars who study the histories of fallen realms. But the stories remain. In villages throughout the region, grandmothers still tell children the tale of the veiled woman and the Alpha King. The details change, names shift, events compress, time blurs the edges of truth and legend. But the heart of the story stays the same. a woman who was hidden, a man who saw, a love that changed everything. And sometimes, on nights when the moon hangs full and silver in the sky, people swear they can see two figures walking among the ruins. A tall man with long black hair and a fierce face softened by tenderness. A woman with white hair and marks like fallen stars on her pale skin. They walk hand in hand, these ghostly figures. They pause at windows that no longer exist and gardens that have long since returned to wildness. They seem lost in conversation, in each other, in a love that even death could not diminish. Those who see them say it feels like witnessing something sacred, something that proves love can outlast kingdoms and centuries, and even the boundaries between life and death. They call them the moon lovers, the eternal mates, the king and his Luna. But if you could hear what they say to each other, if the wind carried their whispered words across the gap between worlds, you would hear something simpler. "I found you again," he says, just as he did that first night. "You always do," she answers, just as she always will. And the moon smiles down on them, and the stars keep their secrets, and love continues. As it always does, as it always will, hidden sometimes, revealed others, but eternal beneath every veil. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.